Welcome everyone. Just at the top of the hour, we are in webinar mode, so attendees don't have video or audio. It just helps us manage. And in this particular webinar where we are re-examining Varna and Jaati, the caste system, we know we are gonna have a lot of questions and it's gonna be an important webinar. And one of the things that there's so many different ways to get started on this, but in my own understanding of caste as a projection of European social structures and class onto Varna and Jaati, which Kalyanji is going to really explain and give us some strong foundational understanding of. Just one thing that I like to say, and we often get tagged with caste is inextricably tied to Hinduism. And I just find that false, right? As Hindus, we take ideas, we accept, we evolve, we change, we modernize. And it's like saying Christianity is inextricably tied to chattel slavery, or Islam is inextricably tied to murdering infidels, right? There are different ranges, and we're gonna get into a complicated discussion with Kalyanji, president of Hindu University of America. He's done so much research on this. I've gotten a glimpse into a 150-page paper. We're going to have a class on this in the future, but we know we need to at least get out there and present these ideas because it's an important space of contention and misinformation. And as a Hindu thought leader, we as an organization in that space, we need to address this. And so with that kind of broad outline, let me hand it over to Kalyan Viswanathan, Sri Kalyan Viswanathan, to give a little background. And again, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box, not in the chat box. We want to keep a good documentation of what is asked and how we're answering these questions, because they're going to come up again and again. So with that in mind, let's hand it over to Kalyanji, who will get us into this important webinar.
Okay, all right. Namaste, everybody. Thank you. I would like to begin by, gently posing a question in the chat window. Where are you from? Where are you living right now? Where are you logging in from? That's the question. Okay, just respond to that question. Seattle, Michigan, Chicago, Houston, San Jose, Chicago, San Francisco, Austin, Phoenix, Coimbatore, Bloomington, Atlanta, Portland, Hyderabad, Connecticut, New Jersey, Irvine, New York, San Francisco. Okay, Florida, Dallas, Sunnyvale, San Jose. Okay, terrific. So we have about 150 odd participants here, Pennsylvania, West Virginia. Okay, very good. Okay, welcome to all of you. Let me close the chat window and share my screen. So I would like to frame this as a conversation. Okay, it's certainly not a complete conversation, and you can think of it in terms of a joining an ongoing conversation, one that is increasingly significant in the world, it appears. Okay, so to kick this off, I want to start with a question. Okay, so what is the distinction between opinion, knowledge, and truth? Opinion, knowledge, and truth. And I'd like to stop my sharing for a second and see if, Ankur, the very first question, the poll, are you ready with the poll? Okay. So here is a poll, okay? Everybody, you're going to get a poll. Do you acknowledge the difference? Do you acknowledge the difference between your opinion and the truth? No, the word truth is missing, my friend Ankur. It says opinion and the. So the question is opinion and the truth. Okay. And there are 4 answers. Never. I think my opinion is the truth. Sometimes I acknowledge that my opinion is not the truth. The third answer is occasionally I confuse my opinion with the truth. Always, I never confuse my opinion with the truth. I never do it. I'm very clear that my opinion is just my opinion. It is not the truth. Okay. So please pick a choice. Okay. Everybody, just pick a choice. Can we see it live or no? Oh, good. You're on mute. Okay.
Do you want me to share?
Yeah, just share the outcomes. Everybody, please vote. Please make your selection. Let me see what you say. Okay. Let's all see what you say.
We have 130 people, 131 out of 167, maybe.
I'm not seeing the results. Can you show the results?
Let me just end the polling, then everyone can see it.
Okay.
Too many things open. All right. 40. All right.
We have 170 people on the webinar. Are you going to show the results now? All right, there you go. Terrific. Okay. There are 4% of the people who say never. I never make a difference between my opinion and the truth. I think that my opinion is the truth. I always insist it is. We all know somebody like that who confuses his opinion with the truth. Okay, 33% are saying sometimes I acknowledge that my opinion is not the truth. Sometimes, okay, which means what? Which means at other times, maybe most of the time, I don't acknowledge that my opinion is not the truth. Okay, then another 34% are saying occasionally I confuse my opinion with the truth. I'm unable to make a distinction between my opinion and the truth, and I get kind of self-righteously stuck on my opinion, and I start insisting that that is indeed the truth. And then there are 34% who says always, I never confuse my opinion with the truth, meaning that you are always at all times able to maintain a distinction between your opinion and the truth. Okay, the last 34%, I think we should survey your spouses to get a reality check on that answer. Okay, how often do you confuse your opinion with the truth? Okay, good. So I think what this says is that there is a considerable degree of confusion generally, and particularly when it comes to the subject of the caste system. Everybody has an opinion. It seems everybody has a theory too. You worked out, all of us have worked out an amateur theory sitting in our homes about how it all came about. And we think it is probably the truth. Probably the truth. Okay, so I wanted to start here because it is important that we develop a little space between our opinions and the truth. Okay, and what the value of that is that we won't get attached to it, and then there is the potential for this conversation not to be contentious. Okay, so let's see. Has the contentions already started in the chat window? All right, opinions about the question itself. Yeah, was everybody able to see the response? The summary of the response. Was everybody able to see the summary of the response? You should be able to see it, okay? So something like 96 plus 47, 103, 108 people, 158 people responded to this poll. Okay, good. So we're doing good. Okay, so there's going to be a lot more polls here as we move along. Okay, so that's just the beginning. We're just getting started here. All right, great. Let me go back to my PowerPoint. Now, when it comes to something as complex as complex as the Varna Jaati caste system, which admittedly has lasted several thousand years in India. One can trace its origins and references to many, many Smritis, the Vedas, the Purusha Shukta, the Bhagavad Gita, the Mahabharata, Ramayana, almost everywhere. Varna and Jati are everywhere. So it is impossible to sort of say this is some kind of later development. Okay, and it is inevitable that we develop a partial view. Okay. The question is, can anyone find the whole truth about Varna, Jati, and caste? Can anyone find the whole truth across thousands of years? Get a critical accounting, a critical and definitive reconstruction of what exactly happened? Can anyone do it? Any one person do it? Can they? If you don't confuse your own imaginings, okay, whatever we imagine, if we don't confuse that with the truth, can anyone find the whole truth? That's the question. Okay. Is anybody saying yes to that question? No. A full reconstruction is not possible. Okay, good. I think that's a fair. I think if we were humble about it, anybody who has a certain measure of humility would say it's very hard to do this. Okay. Can anyone be sure that they know everything about the system that there is to know? In other words, that we have found the truth and there's nothing more to know. All that there is to do is to convince everybody else that I have found the truth. Therefore, all that you have to do is agree with me, and there's nothing else to be done here. Can anyone be sure that they know the truth fully? Any answers to that question? Okay. Yeah, it is possible to come up with competing theories. Definitely. Yes, it is possible. And the theories, competing theories, can be based more or less on different kinds of evidence, a certain combination of evidence and imagination, or better still, a combination of evidence and imagination and pure projection. And projection, by projection, what I mean is projection of already existing, sort of pre-existing prejudices. Okay. We can, however, ascertain some facts and develop a working hypothesis. So that much we can all do. Whether we, to what extent we look at the facts, what extent we're simply projecting, to what extent we are simply regurgitating other people's narratives. Every one of us can develop a hypothesis. It's possible. Better still, a half-formed hypothesis. That is possible. Now, caste is in the air again. Okay, in the air again. For those of you who have not heard about it or not yet heard about it, there was a recent book that has come out, written by a Black woman called Isabel Wilkerson. And the words here I have replicated from Amazon in its introduction. And Oprah Winfrey is promoting this book, and she is, she's mailing thousands of copies of these books to various people, influential people, and so on. And this book is supposedly, this book gives a masterful portrait of an unseen phenomenon in America. So the book is about a phenomenon in America, not really India, basically. So an immersive, deeply researched narrative and stories about real people, how America today and throughout its history has been shaped by a hidden caste system, a rigid hierarchy of human rankings. Beyond race, class, and other factors, there's a powerful caste system that influences people's lives and behaviors in the nation's fate. Now, these are claims Isabel Wilkerson is making about America today, not about India. But however, she links the caste system of America, India, and Nazi Germany. And Wilkerson explores 8 pillars that underlie caste systems across civilizations, including divine will, bloodlines, stigma, and more. Okay, so in other words, the divine will, bloodlines, stigma are apparently the characteristics of caste systems across different civilizations, and by applying a gaze that seemingly can subsume, several thousand years of history into a single vision and view, she's able to identify the commonalities and structures that underlie seemingly equivalent systems in America, India, and Nazi Germany. Okay, so that is the book. This book is going to be a very influential book, whether you and I like it or not. It is a book that's going to shape narratives here in the United States. And caste, believe it or not, is in the air all over again. Not only in school textbooks, but also in the real world of current day politics, current day social justice movements, and so on and so forth. Okay. Now I want to pose a question. Okay. So here is a question. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. That among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This is the Declaration of Independence in America. So we are starting there in America right now, okay? Then we'll move in the conversation. That all men are created equal, okay? But if you look at this equality, so-called equality, in terms of distribution of total wealth in the United States, okay? So this is a graph that looks at about maybe 30 years of data. It's pretty reliable data, which shows that on the right side, it shows that the top 10% or 70% of the wealth, total wealth in the United States is owned by 10% of the people. Okay, so that is real. That is a real phenomenon. Okay. Yeah, everybody, I know everybody's got an opinion and you want to deliver a talk on caste, but please, this is a moment for listening, okay, and reflection. So the top 1% of the population in America commands nearly 30% of the wealth, of the total wealth. And 50% of the population in America, 50%, which is the bottom, the dark green at the bottom, hardly own any wealth at all. In fact, in many cases, their wealth is negative, meaning that they owe money to the banks and the various people they borrowed from, and so on, credit cards, and so on and so forth. Okay. So this brings up a set of questions for me in terms of the poll. Okay. So I'm going to stop sharing one more time. Ankur, can you put up the next question on the poll?
Okay. Caste or all men are created equal?
All men are created equal. Yeah. So now I want you to interpret the statement, all men are created equal. I want you to interpret it, okay? What does this statement really mean in the Declaration of Independence? What does all men are created equal really mean? Is it simply a falsehood? Is it an aspiration? Is it a promise of equal rights, but certainly not equal outcomes? Or, I don't know. I don't know what it means. What does all men are created equal? And of course, we got to make sure that all men includes all women too. And sorry, in 1776, they wrote it that way. Okay. Today we would have written it, all humans are created equal. And that is the sort of the character of those times. So please go ahead and answer the question. Okay, this is a poll. What does this mean? All men are created equal. What does it mean really? It's a total falsehood. Meaning, how can it be? People are born in very, very different circumstances. Human birth does not create equality. It creates extraordinary inequality at the very starting point of a human life, isn't it? Some children are born in extreme poverty, extreme illiteracy, extreme destitution, and it creates the initial conditions of their life. Now, whether they're able to overcome those conditions and make it become a successful citizen, whatever that means, or not, is a matter of, seemingly, it's a matter of chance, really. All men are created equal. Now, who did the creating, and what does the equality mean here? Does it really mean anything? Or is it merely a fantasy? Maybe I should have given a choice called it is a fantasy. All right, good. So let's get the answers here. Can you put up the answers? Yeah, okay, good. So there are a lot of people who say equal rights, but not equal outcomes. Okay, it is a falsehood. It is an aspiration. Okay, I don't know. I like the I don't know people because they're being honest about it. That's nice. Okay, equal rights, but not equal outcomes. Okay, now the next question in the sequence. Okay, all men are created equal. Can you go to the next question?
In what sense is it self-evident?
Yeah, in what sense is it self-evident? Yeah. Okay, here is a question. Okay, in what sense is it self-evident? Because the Declaration of Independence says it is self-evident, meaning everybody knows. It should be obvious to everybody. It should be obvious. It's self-evident. It's not a matter of contention. It is not a matter of debate. It's not a matter of argument, contestation. It's a self-evident fact that all men are created equal. In what sense is it self-evident? Everybody knows that they have equal rights. Well, the data shows that everyone has equal rights. If you can show me data for that. It is not self-evident at all. In other words, a person born in extremely difficult, challenging, and debilitating circumstances, as we all know, people are born, throughout the world, they are born in extremely difficult conditions, which gives them a starting point in life, which is very unfair in relation to others. Parents are poor, single parent homes, parents with substance abuse problems, extreme poverty. It's the starting point of a human life. One is born into those conditions. How does one justify that it is self-evident that they all have equal rights? In what sense is it self-evident? Okay, let's get the answers on the table. Okay. Okay. So everybody knows that they have equal rights. Really? How do you know? How do you know what everybody knows? You can't possibly know. The question is very interesting. Okay, all you can do is conjecture that everybody knows, isn't it? You cannot speak for everybody else, can you?
Kalyanji, you have a lot of trick questions here.
I know, that's the whole point here. Okay, so the data shows that everyone has equal rights. Really? What kind of data shows that? What data do you have that shows that everyone has equal rights? It is not self-evident. I think that's altogether a better answer. It is not self-evident. Okay. But somebody is declaring that it is self-evident. Somebody is saying it is self-evident that all men have equal rights. And of course, as you all know it, in 1776, all did not include black men, right? African Americans were not included. And it was not until the 1860s that was changed. And certainly all women were not included. And that changed somewhere in the 1920s, right? So whatever they thought they were saying, all men, it must have been for a very small group of men, and that was the all that they were talking about, isn't it? So one could construe this in the following way. Okay, it is an aspiration, that we want to aspire to live in a world in which all human beings, we can say, are created equal. But are they really? Are they really created equal? In what sense? Okay. It seems inequality is more of a fact, and equality is more of an aspiration, maybe something to wish for, to hope for, to work towards, to struggle towards. Okay. Maybe it's an ideal. Wouldn't it be nice if in the whole world, everybody was equal? Not just in terms of some right, but actually in reality. Okay. Or does the notion of you have equal rights, you have the right to be poor and I have the right to be rich, you have the right to be powerless and I have the right to be powerful. Does that constitute equal rights? I mean, in what sense is it equal rights, really speaking? Okay. Okay, good. So the third question, okay, so does wishing for or hoping for equality, does it produce equality? That's the next question, okay. Yeah. Does aspiring for equality produce equality? No, just declaring that all men are created equal, does it produce equality? Does it create equality? Okay, there are four choices. Yes, it does. Maybe it can. No, it never will. Because it is an aspiration, it is a fantasy, it is a hope, it's a wish. But in reality, it never will produce it. This world will always remain extremely unequal in reality.
If you're on a mobile phone, you probably can't fill out the survey. If you have issues, just type in the chat and we'll try and troubleshoot. But this is a great participation. Appreciate everyone answering Kalyanji's trick questions, some of them. It's a learning process, and getting real-time feedback helps us have this conversation.
All right, let's see. How are they doing in terms of responses? Let's get the responses on the screen. Okay, 3% are saying yes, it does. Okay, that's interesting. Maybe it can. Maybe it can. Okay, that is about 44%. They're saying maybe it can. No, it never will. 48% are saying no, it never will. Okay, 9% saying I don't know. That's good. See, it's very interesting. Okay, so I think we should probably sort of say half of you think maybe it can, and half of you think no, it never will. Right? And I presume you have good reasons to say so. Okay. Good. So let's move on. Okay. I'm gonna move the conversation forward. I'm gonna share my screen again. That was sort of a background conversation. Okay. So now let us move to the Hindu society. Okay. It appears that Hindu society elevated at all times, right from the beginning, the group or the community as having a level of primacy and significance that exceeded the individual who was a member of that group or community. Okay. So if you look at modern society, you have this concept of a state and an individual, you know, and you don't really have a clear sense of a group or a community, even though individuals do of their own volition do participate in different communities. One can participate in many communities. For example, I can participate in the community of educationists and scholars. I can also participate in the community of information technology professionals. I can participate in the community of residents in my neighborhood. Okay, I can participate in the community of something else. Okay, some other hobby that I may have, etc., etc. So in other words, right? So you have freely forming associations in the modern, predominantly Western society. Okay, but in the Indian society, in the Indian world, the Hindu world, from time immemorial, there has been this notion of community. So the question is, what was the ordering principle behind the prioritization of the group, a community, over the individual? Was the primary ordering principle one of interdependence and collaboration? Or was it always meant to be based on competition and exploitation of one community by another? And I think this is a very important question, okay? Right from its original conception. Was it meant to be based on competition and exploitation? Or was it meant to be based upon interdependence and collaboration? I think this is one of the areas where there is a massive amount of confusion. Because today's portrayal of the so-called caste system is that it was rigidly formed and established, set in stone a long time ago, and it was always based on exploitation. One group exploiting the other, claiming superiority over another, and therefore people being left out of the hierarchy, etc., etc. Okay, so this is an important set of questions. But if you think I'm going to answer all the questions, well, I'm going to point in the general direction. Okay, I'm not going to give you definitive answers because, thankfully, I know the difference between my opinion and the truth, and I'm not going to claim that I can give you the truth here. Okay, even though you may be looking for it, I can give you the truth. But we can form some hypotheses. Now, one thing is a fact, though, that caste is not a Hindu word. Of that we can be certain. That's not an opinion. That is not something I have made up or even any Hindu made up. Okay, the English word caste derives from the Spanish and Portuguese word casta, which means race, lineage, tribal, breed, according to a certain Spanish dictionary. When the Spanish colonized the New World, they used the word to mean a clan or lineage. It was, however, the Portuguese who first employed casta, the primary modern sense of the English word caste, when they applied it to the thousands of Jaatis they encountered upon their arrival in India in 1498 CE. Okay, Common Era. The use of the spelling caste with this latter meaning is first attested in the English language in 1613 CE. Okay. So this word itself comes from outside. Why did the Portuguese come to India? I think it's useful for some of you who don't know this. It's useful to revisit this history briefly. Okay. So, it was back in 1455 CE that there was a Pope Nicholas V who issued what is called the Bull Romanus Pontifex, in which he said the kingdoms of Portugal and Castile had been jockeying for position and possession of colonial territories along the African coast for more than a century prior to Columbus's discovery of lands in the western seas. On the theory that the Pope was an arbitrator between nations, each kingdom had sought and obtained papal bulls at various times to bolster its claims on the grounds that its activities served to spread Christianity. The bull Romanus Pontifex is an important example of the papacy's claim to spiritual lordship of the whole world and of its role in regulating relations among Christian princes and between Christians and unbelievers, heathens and infidels. This bull became the basis for Portugal's later claim to lands in the New World, a claim which was countered by Castile and the bull Inter Cetera in 1493. Inter Cetera, the papal bull or decree of 1493, Pope Alexander VI asserts the rights to colonize, convert, and enslave. Okay? The Inter Cetera authorizes Spain and Portugal to colonize the Americas of its native people and subjects. The decree asserts the rights of Spain and Portugal to colonize, convert, and enslave. The last sentence of this decree says, and we make appointment and depute you, and you are said heirs and successors, lords of them, with full and free power, authority, and jurisdiction of every kind. Okay, 1493. Now, Vasco da Gama arrives in India right the same year, 1493. Okay. Sets sail from Lisbon, Portugal in 1797, arrives in Calicut in Kerala in 1498, comes on a second voyage in 1500 and a third voyage in 1524. Francisco de Almeida was appointed the Viceroy of India by Portugal in 1505 CE. But eventually the Portuguese lose control. They cede control to the British when they give up, starting with Bombay, which they give up to the British Crown in 1661. Okay, so for those of us who have no idea how this happened, this is a map recreated by a person by the name of Hugo Refachinho. This is a map that shows Portuguese presence in India. Okay. How many of you are completely surprised by this? Okay, this is a part of India's history that has not been adequately focused upon, isn't it? There seem to be errors in this slide. What is the error, sir?
Yeah, just in that first line, it's a Vasco da Gama set sail from Lisbon, Portugal, 1797. That's just a typo. It should be 1497, right? Or a different year in that first line.
Okay. Now, colonialism and its justificatory discourse. So this is a slide that shows how India's fortunes thoroughly collapsed. Okay, this is a slide that shows the GDP of India as a percentage of the world's GDP across time. And it's recreated from Angus Madison's data from a book that he wrote in the year 2004. And here, there are several things that happened. First of all, there were Islamic invasions, which we are not really visiting in great detail in this webinar. There was Christian colonization. Columbus arrives in America, and in fact, Vasco da Gama arrives in India just before Columbus arrives in America. So those are the two major events. And Portuguese intervention in India happens around that time. And subsequently, there is a complete paradigm shift in the knowledge and the discourse about India that takes place over the next few hundred years. Okay, so in this period, the colonial discourse about India, it starts around the 1700s, It goes on and on for 200, 300 years, unabated. It becomes a kind of received knowledge and established fact. It becomes an uncontestable fact, a set of facts, and it transfers epistemic authority. And during this period, caste becomes the central principle behind the Hinduism itself, in large measure, and Hindu social order to some extent. A quick note on exonyms and endonyms. It's very important. Well, an endonym is a name given by an ethno-linguistic group. An exonym, on the other hand, is a name given by an external ethno-linguistic group to the same thing. For example, Germany is an exonym. People in Germany call their country, completely different. People in Germany call their country Deutschland. People in the Persian lands call their language Farsi. India is called Bharat. What is the name for Hinduism? What is the equivalent for the word religion? And what is the equivalent for the word caste? Okay. The colonialism, which conquered a large part of the world, it has destroyed and assimilated the world's cultures. We live in a world that is shaped by Western ways of thinking, and it is not clear anymore whether we know how to think in our own terms anymore. We're stuck with the language imposed on us by the West. And when I say us, I mean, I'm talking about the Hindus, the Hindu world. Does the Hindu world know how to think and how to speak on its own terms anymore? Or is it stuck with the language imposed on it? Okay. The framing of Hinduism. So, the Hindu world was constituted in terms of a certain ontology, or a set of terms of reference, if you will, which were constituted in Sanskrit for the most part. And the Sanskrit world had a very deep penetration in India. And this consisted of ideas like moksha, dharma, karma, yoga, brahman, etc., etc., etc. And this got replaced by a completely different ontology, a different terminology, which included Aryanism. So the whole discourse on the left was bracketed as the exclusive discourse of Brahminism, and therefore inapplicable to the rest of India. And oh, by the way, Brahminism itself was some kind of an illegitimate byproduct of the intermixing of Aryan and native populations of India. And the great work product of that intermixing was caste, superstition, Dalits, untouchability, and all its attendant problems, including Hindutva, nationalism, Neo Vedanta, etc., etc., etc. So this is the way Hinduism is being framed. And if you have participated only in the discourse on the right side, you probably think it's all true, and not a discourse generated by a certain community. So this constitutes a kind of a paradigm shift. Okay. So if you look at how the Varna Jaati system was constituted, the terminology that was used for the longest time, for many thousands of years, included dharma, karma, janma, punarjanma, varna, jati, guna, sattva, rajas, tamas, kula, gotra, samanya, visesha, antyaja, and avarna. Okay. Antyaja and avarna. This terminology gave way to a completely different terminology. So we have now caste, subcaste, upper caste, lower caste, forward caste, backward caste, most backward caste, other backward caste, scheduled tribe, untouchability, Dalits, casteism, etc., etc. So in other words, one of the byproducts of colonialism is the complete reframing of Hinduism, Hindu social order, from the ontology which was native to the Hindu world into an ontology that was imposed upon the Hindu world by the British. Okay, so I want to ask a question. Do you know exactly when this transition occurred? Anybody who can respond in the chat? When did this transition occur? When did this transition occur? Yeah. So Raj Datta is asking, was an untouchability alive and well in Bharat before the British? See, my answer is you don't know. You think you know, but you don't. Early 1900. Yeah, Rajesh Joshi is about right. Okay. There was a fellow called Herbert Risley, H. Risley. It's a very young fellow, came to India, and he participated in the annual census from the 1871 onwards, 1872, 1871 onwards. There was an annual census that was created. Macaulay was in 1835, okay? And the real crystallization of this terminology started happening much more rigorously in the 1901 census of India. Okay, so in other words, all this terminology came into existence right around 1900, 1901 to be more precise. The person was saying, you mean translation? No, it's not just a translation, sir. It's a complete reframe. Entirely different principles in its operation. This was constituted in the name of progress. So India was progressing. Hinduism was progressing from an untenable ancient world into the modern world. So this is what it is to be modern. It's to be fixated with these categories, not of Hindu creation. Okay. The colonial discourse, if you frame it in Marxist terms, right, it created a dichotomy between the colonizer and the colonized, okay, the exploiter and the exploited, if you will. And if you apply it to the Indian conditions, naturally, that would translate into British being the exploiter and India being the exploited. By the way, how much money did England extract from India over a 200-year period? How much wealth did England? Okay, Dimple, you should not answer. Okay, I want other people to answer. $45 trillion. Okay, that's the most recent estimate. People who are evidence-based, people will say, "Where is your evidence?" Well, it's an estimate. It's a recent estimate published by Columbia University and very well argued by a couple of authors on a book called A Theory of Imperialism by Utsa Patnaik and Prabhat Patnaik, two Indian scholars, very Marxist, very leftist, very communist scholars who have nevertheless done a very important service of estimating the total wealth drained out of India. And $45 trillion was drained out of India over a 200-year period, according to their estimate. Okay. However, the discourse about what happened was completely different. This is what happened in reality. The discourse about what happened framed the conversation entirely differently. How did it do it? Okay. It represented the British as the civilizer and emancipator par excellence. They had come to India to civilize India and emancipate India. And perhaps they charged a small fee of 45 trillion US dollars in today's terms. But what were they civilizing India from? Well, it was the exploiter par excellence, the Brahmin and the lower castes who were exploited. Now, to my knowledge, nobody has demonstrated that the Brahmins extracted $45 trillion from the lower castes at any given time in Indian history. But it is indeed the case. It's a fact that somebody's at least established an estimate for how much wealth England extracted from India. Okay. So now let's move on. What is the fundamental distinction between Varna Jaati and the caste system? What is the fundamental distinction? Is it exactly the same thing? Or is it a mere translation, as somebody is suggesting? It's just a mapping. What does it matter? Whether you call it Varna Jati or whether you call it caste, what does it matter? It is exactly the same thing. Okay. For those of you who argue that way, or who have a tendency to argue that way, I would invite you to explore the origins of certain words. So, for example, is Hinduism a religion? If we say it is, we'll have to explore the origin of the word religion. Where did it come from? Whose category is it? What is the nature of a religion? According to who? Okay? And Hinduism is much more like a vast family of traditions, a collection of traditions that coexist. Religions, on the other hand, prototypically, emerging from Christianity being the world religion, the one true world religion, while all other religions are false religions in the Christian conception, it created an idea called religion. And religions naturally consider all other religions as adversaries, as competitors. On the other hand, traditions, if you use the word traditions, sampradayas, to use a Hindu word, they coexist much more gracefully. They may compete to some extent with each other, but on the whole, they don't make efforts to annihilate other sampradayas, destroy them. So this notion of sampradaya, traditions, gets lost in the translation. Hinduism is a religion, because neither Hinduism is an Indian word or a Hindu word, nor is the word religion a Hindu word. So you see, the language structures create completely new realities, completely new understandings, and that's the point here. To come to this distinction, dharma and moksha, the fundamental distinction, the Western paradigm of discourse, the Christian paradigm of discourse, it appears to be confined or constrained in the realm of karma and artha. Now we are trying to do the reverse mapping. Okay, we're mapping into Hindu categories. Artha and karma are so important, as the most dominant categories in the Western world, with a smattering of dharma. On the other hand, the dharma and moksha are the constitutive principles, the constitutive categories in the Hindu world. And to the extent that these distinctions are absent, dharma and moksha are absent, it creates enormous confusion, because then you start applying ideas drawn from an artha karma orientation upon a system that is not governed by them primarily. So the principles of interdependence and coexistence gets rendered into a framework of competition and exploitation, and Varna and Jati gets collapsed into caste. Okay, so this is an important idea. Let's move on. A few verses from the Bhagavad Gita. Okay, so here, 1842, Bhagavad Gita says, tranquility, restraint, austerity, purity, patience, integrity, knowledge, wisdom, and trust in the Vedas. These are the intrinsic qualities of Brahma Karma. Okay, Brahma Karma. It does not say Brahmin Karma, it says Brahma Karma. Brahma Karmas Swabhavacha. Swabhava. Okay. The next verse, 1843. Valor, strength, fortitude, skill in weaponry, resolve never to retreat from battle, large-heartedness and charity, and leadership abilities. These are the natural qualities of kshatram karma. Kshatram karma svabhavaja. Again, it doesn't say kshatriya, jati. Okay. Brahma Kshatra partnership. Yatra Yogeshwara Krishna, Yatra Partho Dhanurdhara, Tatra Shri Vijayo Bhuti Dhruvaniti Madhir Mama. So here, wherever there is Sri Krishna, the Lord of Yoga, wherever there is Arjuna, the supreme warrior, here you can take it to mean the archetypes, the archetype of wisdom, and the archetype of dharma, jnana and dharma, yoga and dharma. There will certainly be unending wealth, victory, well-being, and righteousness. Of this I am certain. 1878, the final verses of the Bhagavad Gita. Okay, I'm just moving into the terminology within the Hindu world, okay? Now, the questions not asked in contemporary scholarship are the following. In what ways did the Islamic invasions of India impact the Varna Jaati social order? In what ways did the colonial era impact the Varna Jaati social order? Did the Varna Jati social order remain unchanged throughout the era of Islamic and British rule of India? How do we understand the ways in which the social order evolved over time? It seems like almost nobody is interested in these questions as a matter for research. It seems all that is important is to frame the Hindu society into a rigid social order that was invented in 1901 or thereabouts, and make the claim that the entire Hindu world was always like that from time immemorial. And of course, somebody said Buddha here. So from Buddha to Ambedkar, and the modern Dalit movement, everybody has been trying to destroy, the Hindu Varna Jati order. And having discovered that it is impossible to exit this Varna Jati social order, that the only alternative is to convert and move out of Hinduism entirely. Okay. Now, one small caveat to that: a sannyasi in the Hindu system exits the social order. He no longer has a varna or a jati. He's now sannyasi. So there is a way of exiting the social order, that is through sannyasa. Of course, there's another way of exiting the social order by claiming that you're no longer part of it, which is equivalent to leaving Hinduism entirely and embracing some other ideology, some other worldview, some other religion, a Dalit worldview, or a communist worldview, or you can say a Christian worldview, and so on and so forth. But the question that remain unasked and therefore largely unanswered is, what was the consequence of the impoverization of India, of the invasions into India, of the enormous poverty, and destitution and degradation that Hindu society experienced over several hundred years? What was the impact of that on the Varna Jati social order? And contemporary discourse almost never goes there. Okay, instead it gets stuck on a view that this thing is a poison that's been there from time immemorial, and it has to be eradicated, and there is no remedy for it. It is an irredeemable condition in India. And surprisingly, after 1947, the terminology imposed upon the Indian social order by the British has only become stronger and stronger. And not only do jatis identify as backward and forward and most backward and scheduled and so on and so forth, the claims to those statuses, those categories, are now linked with certain benefits and so on. How did colonialism affect India? Well, here is one quotation. Okay, not that Jawaharlal Nehru is an authority on this subject, but at least this is a quotation India became an agricultural colony of industrial England, supplying raw materials and providing markets for England's industrial goods. This is from his book, The Discovery of India. The liquidation of the artisan class led to unemployment on a prodigious scale. What were the scores of millions who had so far been engaged in industry and manufacture to do now? Where were they to go? Their old profession was no longer open to them, and the way to a new one was barred. They could die, of course. That way of escape from an intolerable situation is always open. And they did die in tens of millions. The English Governor General of India, Lord Bentinck, reported in 1834 that the misery hardly finds a parallel in the history of commerce. The bones of the cotton weavers are bleaching the plains of India. That's a quotation from Lord Bentinck. And one of the things that we ought to know is that there was a significant amount of population displacements that occurred in India, and vocational displacements, not only during colonial era, but also during the Islamic era. Things perhaps were much worse in the Islamic period. But we have no clear ability to reconstruct exactly what happened. Okay. So here is one example, the fall of a Kshatriya Jaati. Okay. So this is a stamp issued by the government of India. It was issued relatively recently. It depicts a queen called Velu Nachiyar. She was a princess of Ramanathapuram, the only child of a king, Raja, Chellamuthu Vijaya Raghunatha Setupati. And the queen, Rani, Sakanti Dathal of the Ramnad kingdom. And she married the king of Shivagangai, as it's called in Tamil, Muttu Vaduganada Periya Udaya Thevar. Okay, so that's a mouthful there, but just look at the underlined words, okay? The Nachiyar, the word Nachiyar, the word Thevar. Velu Nachiyar was the first queen to fight for the freedom from the British in India. And she successfully defeated the British in an encounter in around 1780 CE. She was one of the few rulers who regained the kingdom she had lost and ruled it for 10 more years. In 1790, she gave the throne up to her daughter, Vellachi. And Velu Nachiyar died in the year 1796. And recently, the government of India commemorated her. But believe it or not, both the Thevar and the Nachiyar communities are today classified as most backward castes. Okay, just one example of how Jaatis can rise and fall. Jaatis are not static, perhaps they never were. Okay, so if you map Varna and Jaati to a two-dimensional matrix, this is an original hypothesis, if you can call it. Maybe people know it already. I don't know. This is my hypothesis, at least, that Varna and Jaati. So there are four Varnas here. There is the Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra Varnas. And Jaatis, perhaps, which were once exclusively contained within a Varna, over time acquire different characteristics. And it is possible that over many generations, we're not talking about a casual move here, this is over a couple 100-year period maybe, Jaatis fell. And the example is the Velu Nachiyar story that I just gave you. Her Jaati fell from being a Kshatriya to a most backward caste in contemporary imagination. Mostly this is what happened in the colonial era and in the Islamic period. If that can happen, then this can also happen. A Jaati too, which is classified in this category, the scheduled caste category, say, can also over time elevate itself, can expand its capabilities, its capacities collectively and move up in this Varna structure, potentially arrive at a completely different configuration over time. It is possible. And, and this is the one possibility that gets completely excluded in the contemporary discourse around caste. This is the one thing that Hindus also themselves appear not to fully comprehend. Okay. To what extent was Varna a choice? Was Varna always a matter of birth, or did it become so over time? So when did it become birth-based? Was it before the invasions and colonization or after? If you imagine this way, that Varna was a product of education, and Jaati and Kula were much more a product of family upbringing, birth and family. Okay, the values, behaviors, habits, ways of worship, spiritual practices, etc., vocations, what they properly called shrenis, guilds, and so on. They were all inherited by the family inheritance. Whereas Varna, on the other hand, even though associated with Jati, it acquired its proper validation through education. For example, one could be born in a Brahmana Jati, but need not perform a Brahmana karma, need not have a Brahmana guna at all. So this is a much more nuanced and complex order. And unless one is educated to this order, it is impossible to recognize one's choice in the matter. Okay, so what happened in the colonial era is that this education, the possibility of being educated, got displaced, got disconnected. Okay, it is very important to recognize this, that when Sanskrit education was lost, that happened at a specific period in time, somewhere between the 1830s to the 1900s, let us say, the possibility of education, of getting properly grounded in the Hindu concepts, the Hindu ideas and values that undergirded the Varna Jati system, when that was lost, perhaps it got hardened through the Jati Kula birth-based framework. And simultaneously, the Hindus were by and large socialized into a new vocabulary. So the question is, what role did the loss of education play? And the reverse of that question is, what role can education play now in recovering a framework that perhaps was not exploitative to begin with? Now, the contemporary education, on the other hand, continually reinforces Hindu dvesha, meaning a certain kind of visceral hatred towards Hinduism, predicated on a critique on the caste system. And what it does is the education continuously invalidates the culture and criticizes the traditional values without ever eradicating the caste system. So the question is, can the caste system as it exists today, can it be eradicated? So let me pose that question. Okay? What do you think? Can it be eradicated? How? Can the caste system be eradicated? Can the caste system be eradicated? Yes. Yeah. How can you eradicate it? Through what? Through some decree process? By ordering, eliminating all the castes? All right. Who, you see, because it is a distributed architecture, and castes and new jatis are constantly forming in the Hindu world. Today, so by the way, let's pose the question, how many castes are there in India? Let's pose that question, Ankur. How many castes and subcastes are there or recorded in India? Let's answer that question. Take 30 seconds. Let's put an answer to this. Okay, let's get some answers here. Okay, Ankur, let's see the answers. Okay, so 39% are saying more than 25,000. 34% are saying less than 5,000. Well, guess what? The 39% is right. There are more than 25,000 enumerated Jaatis in India, castes and subcastes as per the contemporary, the most recent census in 2011. There'll be another census in 2021. But as long as India keeps perpetuating the forward caste, backward caste, most backward caste, other backward caste, etc., it is continuing to frame these communities into a rigid social structure, a rigid and unchanging social structure. And it is not adequately recognizing the possibility that these jatis, through individual effort and through collective effort, can move either up and down, move in the Varna scale, so to speak. Okay. Of course, at the end of the day, we can all pretend to know how it all works. I would just want to show a little cartoon here. Here's a person who says, your report card says you flunked every class. Why do you tell me you got straight A's? This kid is saying, I was merely providing alternate facts. If you can establish the truth by being a loud, aggressive bully, do you need to bother with the facts? Not really. Okay, and there is a world in which we live today. It's fake news and propaganda. And somehow we have to find a way out of this morass in which we find ourselves, in which everybody in this world is participating in a discourse about the Hindu caste system, except the Hindus themselves. Hindu voices are not consulted. And it is one of the defining properties of the contemporary discourse on caste that Hindu voices should not be consulted. Hindu voices should not be allowed on this in the table of discourse. Okay, and this discourse has penetrated the Hindu world to such a deep extent. It is hard to comprehend what the way out of this morass is. Okay, I want to conclude by saying, the Hindus have to learn about Hinduism. Hindus have to learn about Hinduism. Our knowledge is largely incomplete, one-sided, mixed up with Western terminologies and categories. And there is an urgent need that we Hindus ought to revisit our traditions and culture. Of course, there's the alternative to become non-Hindu or atheist or secular and liberal and communist and on, or Christian and Islamic and so on. But I think it would be good if we could make our choices after an appropriate level of study of Hindu Dharma to understand what it is saying, how it is constituted, what are its defining constructs, what are the conceptual foundations of Hindu Dharma. So here is a quotation from Vivekananda: man is to become divine. Hinduism means expansion. Expansion means realization. And again, here that includes women too. The human being is to become divine, realizing the divine more and more from day to day in endless progress. This is a different conception of progress than the progressivism, which imagines a kind of worldly utopia where society will be somehow become perfect and equal very soon. In building up character and making for everything that is good and great and bringing peace to others and peace to one's own self, religion is the highest motive power, and therefore ought to be studied from that standpoint. That I'd like to briefly, before I go there, the ideas of dharma and moksha, which are constituted by an awakened intelligence, spiritual intuition, self-knowledge, integral understanding, and a deep reverence and awareness of the great cosmic mystery of life. That is what it is to study Hindu Dharma. That is what it is. All the rest of it is merely denigrates it without properly understanding. Now, I want to call attention to our Orientation to Hindu Studies course. It's a 1 credit hour course, 10 hours of classes approximately, 20 hours of study, self-study. The next course is beginning on October 8th. It's a Thursday evening from 8 o'clock Central Time to 9:30 p.m. 1.5 hours every week. And it'll be taught by many different faculty. And I promise you, it'll be an incredibly engaging experience from what I can see based upon the feedback we're getting from the students of the last 4 quarters. Okay, with that, I'm going to stop sharing. Let me take a few questions, okay?
Yes, so we're at 10:15 and there are a lot of questions. I'll try and moderate. If I could just say something, you know, the systematic effort to marginalize, disrespect, and trivialize Hinduism has been an ongoing project of Europe for nearly 3 centuries. Most Americans are not aware of this, as we've discussed, and some subconsciously buy into simplified false narratives that depict Hindus as tribal, superstitious, hierarchical, oppressive, violent, and dangerous, and based on caste. And I didn't even understand that stuff before I began working for Hindu University and participating, taking courses. So I think this is part of that awakening. And Kalyanji's thought-provoking questions got you asking questions, and we're going to get into that.
Yeah, so I think, let me answer a couple of questions, right?
Yeah.
Somebody called Sanjay is asking, does it matter how terms are used? Isn't it a more important issue of research to elevate underprivileged as top priority? Okay, let me ask you this, okay? What have you done to elevate the underprivileged? What have I done to elevate the underprivileged? See, the contemporary world is organized around a Western construct of individual freedom, where you take care of yourself and your family, and that's it. And everybody else fends for themselves. So this idea that you have some unique access to elevating the underprivileged is such complete nonsense, you see. You know, yeah, the government of India is doing an enormous amount to provide reservations, to provide affirmative actions, to provide all manner of, enablers for the elevation of the underprivileged. Okay, and Mr. Sanjay, you got to keep in mind, under British rule of India, everybody became underprivileged except the few who got an English education and entered the British administrative architecture as co-opted individuals. Okay, the few people in India, the few families, regardless of Varna and Jaati, who got co-opted into the English administrative structure, they got privileged by that structure. All privilege was with the British, and everybody else was underprivileged. So this, so you've got to, your research is to, if you're talking about research to elevate underprivileged, well, you can do research about how they became underprivileged. How do you do research into how to elevate them? It's a slow process. As India develops its economy, as it rightfully retains its place in the world economy back to where it was once upon a time, right next to China. India and China were the top 2 economies in the world long ago, and India must retain that space. And in that upswing of the Indian economy, to the extent that happens, many Jaatis will get elevated economically first and foremost. And when your basic economic conditions are fulfilled, are elevated, then people can develop interest in wealth. People can get interested in dharma, artha, dharma, and ultimately moksha. It's possible, but that elevation requires education. It requires affirmative action on a very grand scale. And I dare say the Indian government is doing its very best, while at the same time being denigrated constantly for not doing enough. Eradication of caste will be a long way. Well, I want to suggest to you, Mr. Srinivas Gudlavalli, that you can't destroy a distributed architecture. You can maybe destroy a node. I'm using terminology from an entirely different discipline. In a distributed network that self-replicates, you cannot destroy it. You can maybe combine two nodes, two cells in the distributed structure. You can maybe eliminate one node. You can't destroy the whole system. It's literally impossible, because no one individual, no one entity, no one node has the requisite authority to eliminate the system. Okay. All right. Are people exploiting the caste system today? Politicians are doing it. Yeah, surely they're doing it. And democracy empowers the lower castes. Okay, the so-called lower castes of India, the other backward, scheduled tribes, they are empowered because they now have acquired numerical power. Now, insofar as power exists and resides in numbers, a democracy empowers the numerically, larger classes and castes. Okay, so what else? Read me some questions, Uncle. Some interesting. There's a lot of activity going on.
There's a lot. It's getting mixed. So Gaurangji has kind of 3 questions in a row at the start, so I'll go through them. Why equate wealth with equality? If you have equal rights, isn't that actual equality? I kind of you got into that. And in the self-evident poll, maybe belief system is a potential choice.
Let me address that, Uncle. Okay. See, contemporary society is ordered by wealth. There is a class system today. The top 1%, the next 10%, and the next, 20%, and then the remaining 70%, if you will. Okay, so that's like a class ordering, and it is defined by wealth. Okay. Now, in a certain sense, we live in a Vaishya consciousness dominated world today, in a sense, okay, where wealth is the determining factor that produces status, that produces power. The link, the connection between wealth and power, okay, Vaishya and Kshatriya, the connection between Vaishya and Kshatriya powers, which puts the 1% at the very top of modern day societies, is very, very apparent. Okay. Knowledge, the professoriate, so to speak, the contemporary Brahmanas, the literary figures, they are completely subservient to wealth and power. They are not driving the discourse. They are only driving these social justice wars, which pit one group against another group. And that seems to be the most important conversation for the professoriate of today, the humanities of today. Okay, which is why I used wealth as a symbol of status, a symbol of status within the hierarchy, because that's what we know about today. I mean, you can be a poor Brahmin who's well versed in the Shastras, who's very grounded in Sanskrit, who has a tremendous knowledge in the Vedas and so on. That person has literally no place in contemporary society. Okay, and that's why I used it as a placeholder. But you are correct. In principle, if you think of it as a hierarchy, there are multiple hierarchies here. There's a wealth-based hierarchy. There is a numbers-based hierarchy. There is a there is a power-based hierarchy, a knowledge-based hierarchy. So the Varna Jati system is not a single hierarchy. It encompasses multiple hierarchies. Let me leave it at that for now.
So one of the first questions we got was about intuition, right? Understanding history kind of clashes with narratives. But where does intuition and how important is that? And how does that play into our minds kind of being clear and addressing this important issue?
Yeah, so that's great. See, intuitively one can arrive at some kind of knowledge. It's possible. But it has to be put to some kind of external verification. And, in my understanding, the verifying one's intuitive understanding with the texts and traditions of Hinduism is a good counterbalance, a good check. Otherwise, we'll make up things that has no particular validation anywhere. Okay.
Yeah. So Manuji asks, why does the system only exist in India compared to other countries of the world? And I'm just, based on this, we're saying this isn't only in India. It's a complicated system that balances all these different hierarchies, kind of as you mentioned. So it doesn't just exist in India, kind of in the social organizational, but in the specific way it's changed over time.
No, in fact, it existed in a very rigid way in England. See, the lords, the kings, the lords, the dukes, the barons, the earls, and then the peasants. There was a very rigid hierarchy. People who owned land and people who did not own land. That was a very clear demarcation in English society. And in fact, the Marxist argument is based upon the notion, the idea that when the Industrial Revolution washed over Europe, the kings and the kings and the dukes and the earls and the knights and the barons, they naturally became capitalists. And the peasants could do nothing but become workers. Okay, so the dichotomy of the owner and the worker, the capitalist and the laborer, capital class and the labor class, emerged organically from a British hierarchical ordering of that society at that time. So therefore, the India is being uniquely scapegoated, just like if you listen to contemporary discourse in the Washington Post and the New York Times and so on. It is easy to get the impression that the Hindus are the exploiters par excellence in this world, right? They are posing an imminent threat to all other non-Hindu communities, especially the Muslims, who have got now acquired control over some 50, 60 countries in the world, right? And Hindus are supposed to be the imminent threat, right? So here is a reframing, okay, that's constantly going on. And in this reframing process, the Hindu voices are, okay, Shashi Kejriwal is not birth-based. Yeah. The last 300 years, you had no control over organizing your own society, Shashiji. So that's all I'm going to say about it. As though if you're imagining Hindus had any agency in the last 300 years before independence, that's completely false. All right. What else? Let's pick up one or two more questions.
Only recent times the differences between Shri and Srimati were kind of created. It used to be Shri Ram, Shri Sita, and has that changed over time? I don't know if that's if you want to address that. Just okay.
I mean, there are a lot of regional variations to that, and it's not a significant question. Different parts of India did different things.
So if this system is diminishing in India, or is it? It's not exactly diminishing because the government, compared to decades ago, though, does this mean the system was wrong? It's also Manuji's question. Some people had questions about the map itself when you're talking about the Portuguese and how that came up. Oh, the book Caste by Isabel Wilkerson. How are Hindus portrayed in the book? I haven't read the book, so I'm not going to have a particular opinion.
I haven't either, okay? And I think, one thing that we should recognize is the equation of American system of slavery. When black people were bought and sold as slaves and acquired and brought into the United States of America has no parallel in India through historic times, okay? It is true that under extreme impoverization, lots of communities in India collapsed economically, collapsed in status, and were brought into the brink of extinction. That's true. But that economic deprivation was not an original characteristic of India. Unfortunately, we imagine that India's poverty is an endemic condition that has remained forever. That is one of the unfortunate misconceptions that completely distorts the discourse around on this subject. Okay, let's take a few more.
See, there was lots of questions about, the development of words. Where did Hindu come from? A lot of people had that conversation in the chat, and it was super active. Thank you to Dimple and Ravi G, Dimple G and Ravi G, and other folks who've been answering in the chat. Some of these questions that we've addressed in previous webinars, right? And in classes. So obviously we can't get through everything.
I want to.
A lot of that ended in X and M. So if you want to take a shot at it, yeah.
Let me kind of in closure, right? Yeah, let me say a few words in completing this webinar, okay? See, I think it's important that we shy away collectively at this time from making definitive pronouncements about this matter. Okay, but at the same time, we should not shy away from disputing certain so-called established facts when they are blatantly wrong. Okay, in other words, it's easier to say that did not happen or this is false and produce evidence for that than to establish the truth about it all. Okay, and Hindus are not adequately disputing the many claims being made on their behalf by outsiders to Hinduism or people who have a very deep animosity towards Hinduism, which we are now terming Hindu Dvesha. Hindu Dvesha is rampant all around. Okay, it's not the same as Hindu phobia. Hindu phobia is like a fear of Hindus. Hindu Dvesha is more like a deep-rooted aversion, animosity towards Hindus. And Hindu Dvesha is rampant in the media and in the academia. So, Hindus have to respond to this. But first, we need to do some unlearning and relearning of our own, because our own comprehension of this is very mixed up, unfortunately, right? So at Hindu University of America, we hope to provide a pathway for this kind of learning. We hope to provide an opportunity where people can come, engage, and debate. I know many people just want to talk. You want to express your opinions on this webinar. You may have established, you may have well worked out theories about your own views about castes and so on. And all of that has a place. But this is not the webinar is not the place to air out everybody's opinions about the subject. And hopefully I have tried not to point to definitive views about this Varna Jaati system, but rather to gently point in the general direction of certain investigative possibilities. Okay, and I might even add, every Jati has to write its own history to the extent it can. Why not? What was that Jati 200 years ago, 400 years ago? Did it even exist? When did it come into being? Was it there 1,000 years ago? How did these Jatis come into existence? What are the factors that created them? Okay, And this kind of revisiting the history of individual jatis must include what happened to it during the Islamic invasion of India and the Christian colonization of India. It is completely irresponsible on the part of all scholars and laypersons and academics and so on to simply sidestep the period of Islamic invasion and Christian colonization of India as though they were non-events, and simply go back to Manusmriti and the Bhagavad Gita and the Vedas to make arguments about how the caste system has always been as bad from original times as it seemingly is today. Okay. So with that, I'd like to encourage all of you to participate with Hindu University of America. Come and take our courses, and I look forward to more engaging conversations. Now, for those of you who are disappointed you couldn't express your view today in this webinar, come to our classes. There'll be a lot more space and time to talk, to engage, to investigate, to express our views, to debate and discourse. After all, we're not going to get this done in a monologue. We need a dialogue, and our courses are the opportunity for engaging in that dialogue. With that, I would like to say namaste to all of you. Thank you very much, and goodbye. Can you stick the Orientation to Hindu Studies course in the chat window for people?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I personally invite you all to take the Orientation to Hindu Studies course if you've not already taken it. It's a terrific opportunity to begin your journey of engagement, education, learning, research, writing, publication, and developing your own voice in the field of Hindu discourse or discourse about Hinduism, which is going on anyway, whether you like it or not. Okay, so Ankur, we have the link.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And again, that is the place where you can have these conversations, engage with people. This webinar, I know at the start people were saying we can't see each other and we want to interact and engage. Again, I think this webinar laid the groundwork. It had a lot of, we tried to answer a lot of questions. Sorry, we didn't get to all of them. Obviously, Kalyanji asked some very thought-provoking questions. I'm looking forward to the course on this issue topic when we offer it, and we'll definitely get that out in the future. So right now, though, the class to take is the Orientation to Hindu Studies. I've dropped it in the chat one more time. Please enroll. It's a great course. You'll connect with other people, and you will get the opportunity to have robust dialogue and conversation, and express your ideas, write them out, and be a part of our growth and development, and better represent our views, our Hindu views on this important subject and topic. Yeah. Kalyanji, always,
Okay.
it's a pleasure. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, very good. Okay, thank you. And for those of you who feel that I did not get to all your questions, I really, really apologize. And I hope that we will be able to get to every single question and get into these subjects at a later time in our courses and programs. Okay, thank you. Namaste. Bye-bye.
Thank you.